She paid for an old woman's food out of pure compassion, unaware she was feeding the mother of Korea's most feared mafia boss. The diner's fluorescent lights flickered at 2:47 a.m., casting harsh shadows across cracked vinyl booths and coffee-stained laminate tables. Naima Brooks wiped down the counter for the third time that hour, her feet screaming in shoes held together with duct tape and prayer. 6 more hours until her shift ended, then 4 hours of sleep before her second job at the laundromat. Then maybe, if she was lucky, enough money to keep the lights on in her studio apartment for another week. The bell above the door chimed, and Naima looked up with her practiced customer service smile, the one that hid bone-deep exhaustion and the kind of poverty that ground you down to nothing. An elderly Korean woman stood in the doorway, thin as a whisper, wearing clothes that had seen better decades. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, but her coat was threadbare, her shoes worn through at the toes. Naima had seen that look before. Desperation, trying to wear dignity like armor. The woman's eyes scanned the menu board with the careful calculation of someone counting invisible pennies, and Naima's heart cracked open the way it always did for people who reminded her of her own grandmother. "Sit anywhere you'd like," Naima said gently, grabbing a menu and a glass of water. The woman chose the corner booth, the one where people sat when they wanted to be invisible, and accepted the menu with hands that trembled slightly. "Age, or hunger, or both." "Can I start you off with coffee?" Naima asked. "Fresh pot, just made it." "There are, after axum, also massum. How much?" The woman's English was heavily accented, each word carefully shaped. "Coffee's on the house tonight." Naima lied smoothly. It would come out of her tips, but tips were theoretical when you worked the graveyard shift at Frank's Diner in South Central LA. Most nights, she was lucky to clear $20. "Take your time with the menu." Naima returned to the counter, watching from the corner of her eye as the woman studied the prices with increasing distress. She knew that look too. The mental math of someone trying to figure out how to afford a meal without sacrificing something else essential. Medicine, rent, bus fare. When Naima returned, the woman had folded the menu carefully. "Decision made. Just toast, please. Dry. And water is fine. Toast. Dry toast." The cheapest thing on the menu at $1.50. Naima felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest, the same feeling that had made her steal food from her high school cafeteria to feed her younger siblings, that had made her drop out of community college to work 2 jobs when her mother got sick. "You know what?" Naima said, pulling out her order pad with theatrical brightness. "My manager's making me test out this new special before we put it on the menu. Kimchi stew with rice, banchan, the works. I need someone to try it and give honest feedback. Would you mind? It's completely free, actually. You'd be doing me a favor." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, pride and suspicion warring with hunger. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity, it's quality control," Naima insisted. "Plus, if you don't eat it, I have to. And I've been trying to cut back on late-night meals." "Please? I really need the feedback from my manager." The lie was transparent, but hunger won. The woman nodded slowly. "Okay, I will help." Naima disappeared into the kitchen, where Frank, 60 years old, perpetually hung over, but with a soft spot for his late-night waitress, was smoking by the back door. "Frank, I need the kimchi jjigae, full spread. And I'm paying for it." "That's $15, girl. You barely made that in tips tonight." "I know. Ring it up anyway." Frank studied her with bloodshot eyes that had seen too much of life's cruelty. "You got a good heart, Naima. Gonna get you in trouble one day. Probably, but not today." She brought out the food 15 minutes later, steaming stew in a stone pot. Fluffy white rice, 6 different banchan in small dishes, even the expensive kimchi Frank usually reserved for his Korean regulars. The woman's face transformed when she saw it, something between joy and pain. This is too much," she whispered. "Manager went overboard," Naima said with a shrug. "Trying to impress corporate? Eat up, and let me know if the seasoning's right." She busied herself wiping down tables, giving the woman privacy to eat, but she watched from the corner of her eye as the elderly woman took the first bite and saw her eyes close in something that looked like prayer, or remembrance, or relief so profound it was sacred. The woman ate slowly, savoring every bite with the careful attention of someone who knew hunger intimately. When she finished, she sat back with tears streaming down her weathered face. "Are you okay?" Naima rushed over, alarmed. "Was something wrong with the food?" "No, no." The woman wiped her eyes with a paper napkin. "It's perfect. It tastes like home. Like when my son was small and I would cook for him before." She stopped, shaking her head. Before everything changed. Naima slid into the booth across from her, breaking every rule about fraternizing with customers. "Where's your son now?" The woman's expression shuddered. "He doesn't want me anymore. I became inconvenient, an embarrassment to his success." Her hands twisted the napkin. "I haven't seen him in 6 months." "I'm sure that's not true," Naima said gently. "Maybe there's a misunderstanding." "Ix, no misunderstanding." The woman's voice turned bitter. "He told me to leave, said I reminded him of weakness, of the past he wanted to forget. So I left. And now I live in a shelter 3 blocks from here, and I walk past his building every day, and I wonder if he ever thinks of me." Naima's throat tightened. She thought of her own mother, dead 2 years now from cancer they couldn't afford to treat properly. What she wouldn't give for one more day, one more conversation, one more meal together. "He's a fool then," Naima said fiercely. "Anyone who would abandon their mother. He doesn't deserve you." The woman smiled sadly. "You are kind. Too kind for this world. What is your name, child?" "Naima. Naima Brooks. I am Mrs. Lee." "And Naima." She reached across the table, taking Naima's hand in her thin, cold fingers. "Thank you. Not just for the food, for treating me like a person, for seeing me when most people look through me like I'm already a ghost." "You're not a ghost, Mrs. Lee. You're here. You're real. And you matter." They talked for another hour. Naima learned that Mrs. Lee had come to America 40 years ago with her husband, that they'd built a small grocery store from nothing, that her husband had died 10 years ago, and her son had changed after that. Became harder, colder, more focused on power and success than family. "He has a tattoo now," Mrs. Lee said with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "On his neck, a tiger. He showed it to me once, said it represented strength. But I think it represents forgetting who he was, where he came from." When Mrs. Lee finally left, pressing Naima's hand one more time with whispered blessings in Korean, Naima watched her disappear into the pre-dawn darkness. Then she went to the register and paid Frank the $15, more than half her night's tips, and tried not to think about the electricity bill that was already 2 weeks overdue. "You're too soft, girl," Frank muttered, but he slipped a $10 bill into her apron pocket when she wasn't looking. 3 blocks away, in a penthouse that cost more per month than most people made in a year, Lee Jun-young stood at floor-to-ceiling windows and watched the sun rise over Los Angeles. At 28, he controlled the largest Korean organized crime network on the West Coast. His legitimate businesses, restaurants, real estate, import-export generated hundreds of millions annually. His illegitimate ones generated even more. He was powerful, feared, respected, and utterly, completely alone. The tiger tattoo on his neck caught the morning light black ink crawling up from his collarbone, wrapping around his throat like a promise of violence. He'd gotten it the day after he'd told his mother to leave, after she'd begged him one too many times to quit the business, to remember his father's dreams of honest work and quiet dignity. He'd told her she was weak, that she didn't understand the world they lived in now, that her presence made him vulnerable in a business where vulnerability meant death. And he'd watched her pack her bags with tears streaming down her face, and he'd felt nothing. Or told himself he felt nothing. The truth, the one he never admitted even to himself, was that he'd sent her away to protect her because his enemies were circling. Because being Lee Jun-young's mother had become a death sentence. Because love was a liability he couldn't afford. But God, he missed her. Missed her cooking, her gentle corrections, her stories about his father. Missed having someone who knew him before he became this a monster in expensive suits who solved problems with violence and intimidation. His phone buzzed. His second-in-command, Dae-sung. "Boss, we have a situation. The shipment from Busan Customs found irregularities. We might have a mole." Jun-young's expression went cold. "Handle it. Quietly. And find the leak. Already on it. Also, The Russians want a meeting about territory disputes. Tell them I'll consider it. After they pay the interest they owe from the last deal. They won't like that. I don't care what they like. They pay, or they get out of my city. He hung up and pressed his forehead against the cool glass. This was his life now. Constant warfare disguised as business. Loyalty bought with money and fear. Power that isolated him from everything human. His stomach growled, and Jun Young realized he hadn't eaten in 24 hours. Again, he could have his chef prepare something, but the penthouse felt like a mausoleum tonight. Too many rooms, too much silence. On impulse, he grabbed his keys and headed out. There was a diner a few blocks away, the kind of place he'd eaten at as a kid, when his parents were still struggling, still honest, still together. He'd passed it 100 times, never stopped. But tonight, or this morning, he needed something real. Something that didn't taste like money and blood. Naima was refilling the coffee maker when the bell chimed again. She turned, expecting another drunk or insomniac, and froze. The man in the doorway was devastating. Tall and lean with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. He wore all black, expensive black, the kind that whispered wealth without shouting it. But it was the tattoo that made Naima's breath catch. A tiger, intricate and fierce, crawling up his neck like it was hunting something. He has a tattoo now. On his neck, a tiger. Consensagin Furan. A tiger clued unquart. Mrs. Lee's words echoed in Naima's mind, and suddenly she knew. Knew with the certainty of gut instinct and coincidence too perfect to be anything but fate. This was him, the son who'd abandoned his mother, the successful businessman who'd forgotten where he came from. Sit anywhere you'd like, Naima said, her voice cool. Professional, giving nothing away. He chose the counter, sliding onto a stool with the unconscious grace of someone who knew how to move through the world like he owned it. Up close, he was even more striking and more dangerous. There was something in his eyes, a hardness that spoke of violence, witnessed and committed. Coffee, he said. His voice was deep, barely accented. And whatever's good. Everything's good here, Naima lied. Frank's cooking ranged from mediocre to actively bad. But the kimchi fried rice is decent. Something flickered in his expression. You know Korean food? We get a lot of Korean customers. Another lie. They got maybe 2 Korean customers a week. I'll put that in for you. She brought his coffee and watched as he wrapped his hands around the mug like he was cold, even though the diner was stuffy with broken AC. There was something almost vulnerable in the gesture, at odds with everything else about him. You work here every night? He asked. Graveyard shift, 6 days a week. That's brutal. Naima shrugged. Bills don't pay themselves. Plus, I've got a day job. His eyebrows rose. 2 jobs? 2.5, if you count the weekend gig cleaning offices. But who's counting? She said it lightly, but couldn't quite hide the exhaustion. That's admirable. And unsustainable. Well, when you figure out a better option on minimum wage and a high school diploma, let me know. The words came out sharper than intended. Naima immediately regretted it. Customers didn't like attitude, especially not at 6 a.m. when they were hungover or tired. But instead of getting offended, he smiled. A real smile that transformed his severe features into something almost boyish. Fair point. I apologize, that was condescending. Most people don't apologize, Naima said, surprised. Most people are assholes. He took a sip of coffee, grimaced. This coffee is terrible, by the way. Stam Mater is not ban, I know, but it's hot and caffeinated, which is really all anyone can ask for at this hour. His smile widened. Also fair. The rice came up, and Naima brought it over Frank's version of kimchi fried rice, which was mostly just leftover white rice fried with kimchi from a jar and an egg on top. Nothing like the real thing. But the man, Mrs. Lee's son, though he didn't know she knew, ate it with the same careful attention his mother had shown earlier. It's not great, he said after a few bites, but it's honest, no pretense. That's Frank's cooking in a nutshell. Honest and mediocre. He laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised Naima. You always this blunt with customers? Only the ones who seem like they can handle it. She refilled his coffee without asking. Most people want me to smile and nod and treat them like they're special. You seem like someone who gets enough of that already. His expression shifted, becoming unreadable. What makes you say that? The way you move. The way you look around like you're assessing threats. The watch that probably costs more than I make in 6 months. Either you're very successful, very paranoid, or both. Definitely both. He pushed the empty plate away. What's your name? Naima. I'm Jun Young. He extended his hand across the counter, and Naima hesitated before shaking it. His grip was firm, warm, and sent an unexpected jolt of electricity up her arm. Nice to meet you. Naima, who works 3 jobs and doesn't take shit from strangers. Nice to meet you, Jun Young, who eats bad kimchi fried rice at 6 a.m. They smiled at each other, and Naima felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Attraction. Yes, he was gorgeous in a severe, dangerous way, but also recognition. Like looking at someone and seeing all the ways they were trying not to break. He paid, left a $100 tip on a $12 meal, and was gone before Naima could protest. She stared at the bill, then at the door, then at Frank, who'd been watching the whole exchange with raised eyebrows. That, Frank said, is Lee Jun Young. He owns half the buildings in Koreatown. Word is he owns a lot more than buildings too, if you know what I mean. Naima's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Korean Mafia girl. He's the boss. The big boss. Runs everything from legitimate businesses to less legitimate operations. Dangerous as hell. Frank pointed at her with his spatula. And you just flirted with him. I did not. You absolutely did. And he flirted back. Frank shook his head. Naima, girl, you gotta be careful. Men like that, they're walking trouble. Naima looked down at the $100 bill, thinking about Mrs. Lee eating dry toast, living in a shelter 3 blocks from her son's penthouse. Thinking about the bitterness in her voice when she'd said, he doesn't want me anymore. And she thought about Jun Young's smile, the vulnerability in how he'd held his coffee cup, the loneliness that radiated from him like cold. Too late, she muttered. I think trouble already found me. Jun Young returned the next night. And the night after that, and the night after that. Always between 5:30 and 6 a.m., always ordering coffee and whatever Naima recommended, always leaving tips that made her uncomfortable but desperately needed. They talked. About nothing. About everything. He never mentioned his business, and she never mentioned his mother. But they talked about Los Angeles, about loneliness, about the weight of expectations and the cost of survival. Why do you work so hard? He asked one morning, watching her refill salt shakers during a lull. Because I have to. My mom died 2 years ago with medical bills that would choke a horse. I'm still paying them off. Plus rent, utilities, student loans, from the 1.5 years of college I managed before dropping out. She shrugged. The math is simple. Work or starve. You went to college? Something shifted in his expression. Interest, maybe. Or respect. 1.5 years. Business administration. Had to quit when mom got sick. Naima smiled without humor. Turns out, taking care of a dying parent doesn't leave much time for classes. Or money for tuition. I'm sorry. Me too. She wanted better for me. Worked herself to death trying to give me opportunities. And I ended up right where she started, broke and struggling. The bitterness surprised her. She usually kept that buried. You're not where she started, Jun Young said quietly. You're fighting. Is it? Because some days it feels exactly the same. He reached across the counter, covering her hand with his. The touch was electric, inappropriate, and exactly what Naima needed in that moment. It's different. Trust me. They stayed like that for a long moment, hands touching, something unspoken building between them. Then the bell chimed as a customer entered, and they broke apart like teenagers caught kissing. But after that, everything changed. The touches became more frequent, hands brushing when he paid, shoulders bumping when she sat beside him at the counter during slow hours. The conversations became deeper, more personal. He told her about taking over his father's business, about the weight of legacy and expectation. She told him about her siblings, younger brother and sister, she helped support financially, even though she could barely support herself. You take care of everyone, Jun Young observed one morning. Who takes care of you? I do. That's how it works when you're poor. You learn to be your own safety net. That sounds lonely, says the man who eats alone at a diner every morning, instead of going home. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Touché. Why do you come here? Naima asked. Really? You could eat anywhere. Fancy restaurants, private chefs. Why Frank's Diner at 6 a.m.? Jun Young was quiet for a long time. Then, because here, I'm just a customer. Not a boss, not a legacy, not a threat or an opportunity. Just a person. And you're the first person in years who's treated me like one. That's sad. It's reality. He drained his coffee. When you have power, everyone wants something or fears something. Nobody just talks to you. I'm talking to you. I know. His eyes found hers, dark and intense. That's why I keep coming back. It happened 3 weeks after their first meeting. Naima was walking home after her shift. Stupid, maybe. But the bus fare added up and her apartment was only a mile away. She'd walked it hundreds of times, knew which streets to avoid, kept her head down and her keys between her fingers. But this morning, 3 men stepped out of an alley, and Naima knew immediately she was in trouble. They were young, high, or drunk, or both, with a particular brand of entitlement that came from never facing consequences. Hey, beautiful, the tallest one called. Where you headed so early? See, Naima kept walking, heart pounding. Not interested. Didn't ask if you were interested. He moved to block her path, and the other 2 flanked her sides. Asked where you were going. Home. Let me pass. What's the rush? We just want to talk. His hand reached for her arm, and Naima jerked back. Don't touch me. Or what? His smile turned ugly. You gonna call for help? Nobody cares what happens to girls like you out here. The rest of his sentence died as a black Mercedes pulled up to the curb with predatory smoothness. The door opened, and Jun Young stepped out, and Naima watched the 3 men's faces drain of color. Get in the car, Naima, Jun Young said quietly. His expression was pleasant, almost friendly, but his eyes were dead, and the tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse with menace. Boss Lee. The tall man stumbled backward. We didn't know. Get in the car. Jun Young didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. The threat was in every syllable, every controlled breath. Naima didn't argue. She climbed into the Mercedes, hands shaking with adrenaline and relief. Through the window, she watched Jun Young say something to the 3 men, something quiet that made them go even paler. Then he was sliding into the driver's seat beside her, pulling away from the curb with controlled precision. They drove in silence for several blocks before Naima found her voice. Thank you. What the hell were you thinking? The words came out harsh, jagged with fear trying to disguise itself as anger. Walking alone at this hour? In this neighborhood? I walk home every day. I can't afford. I don't care what you can afford. You could have been hurt. Killed. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Do you have any idea what almost happened? Yes, actually, I do. Because unlike you, I don't get to live in a world where everyone's afraid of me. Naima's own anger flared, hot and defensive. I live in the real world, where bus fare costs money I don't have, where walking is free, and where sometimes bad things happen to people who don't have the luxury of safety. Jun Young pulled over abruptly, turning to face her with eyes blazing. You think I don't know about the real world? You think power protects you from everything? My mother. He stopped, jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. Your mother what? Naima asked softly. Nothing. Forget it. He started driving again, and the silence was thick with things unsaid. He drove her to her apartment building, a rundown complex in a neighborhood only marginally better than the one she'd left. Naima reached for the door handle, then stopped. How did you know? She asked. That I was in trouble. How did you know where to find me? Right. Jun Young wouldn't meet her eyes. I've been having someone watch you? Make sure you get home safe after your shifts. Naima should have been angry, should have felt violated. Instead, she felt something warm unfurl in her chest. You've been protecting me? Someone has to. He finally looked at her, and the vulnerability in his expression stole her breath. You take care of everyone else. Let me take care of you. Why? The question came out as a whisper. Because. He reached out, cupping her face with devastating gentleness. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be human. Because you see me, really see me, and you're not afraid. Because I think I'm falling in love with you, and that terrifies me more than anything in my entire life. Naima's breath caught. June Young. I know it's crazy. I know we're from different worlds. I know I'm dangerous for you. But Naima, I can't stop thinking about you. Can't stop wanting to hear your voice, see your smile, listen to you talk about everything and nothing. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. Tell me I'm not alone in this. Tell me you feel it too. She should say no. Should protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak. But Naima was tired of protecting herself, tired of being alone, tired of pretending she didn't feel the electricity between them every time they touched. I feel it too, she whispered. God help me. I feel it too. He kissed her then, soft and searching and full of desperate hope. And Naima kissed him back, drowning in the taste of him, the feel of his hands in her hair, the way he touched her like she was precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back in. I need to tell you something, Naima said. About 3 weeks ago. About someone I met. What about them? An elderly woman came into the diner. She was hungry, couldn't afford food. I bought her dinner. Naima watched his face carefully. Her name was Mrs. Lee. She told me about her son, the successful one who didn't want her anymore. Jun Young went completely still. What did you say? Why? Mrs. Lee, your mother. I fed her kimchi jjigae and listened to her talk about how much she missed you. Naima's voice was gentle but firm. She's living in a shelter, Jun Young. 3 blocks from your building, and she walks past it every day, hoping to see you. The color drained from his face. She's in a shelter? You didn't know? I told her to leave. Gave her money enough for a decent apartment. Living expenses for years, I thought. He pressed his hands against his face. Oh God, she didn't take the money. She took her pride instead. Naima took his hands, pulling them away from his face. Jun Young, she doesn't hate you. She misses you. She's heartbroken and confused, but she doesn't hate you. I sent her away to protect her. My enemies, they would have used her against me. I thought if she was gone, if no one knew where she was, she'd be safe. His voice cracked. I didn't know she was suffering. I didn't know. Then fix it. Find her. Talk to her. Tell her the truth. What if she won't see me? What if I've destroyed everything? Gone. You won't know until you try. Naima squeezed his hands. But Jun Young, if we're going to do this, if we're going to be together, you need to face this. I won't be with a man who can abandon his mother and live with it. That's not who I fall in love with. You're falling in love with me? The question was hesitant, hopeful, terrifyingly fast. But I meant what I said. Fix this, or we're done before we start. Don't forget her. He nodded slowly. Okay, help me find her. Please. I don't even know which shelter. There are only 3 in the area. We'll check them all. They found her at the second shelter in a dormitory-style room with 40 other beds. Mrs. Lee was awake, sitting on her cot with perfect posture, reading a Korean newspaper someone had left behind. When she looked up and saw her son, every emotion imaginable crossed her face. Shock, joy, anger, pain. Aoma, Jun Young said, the Korean word for mother sounding foreign after months of English. He dropped to his knees in front of her, traditional gesture of respect and apology. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Mrs. Lee's eyes filled with tears. She said something in rapid Korean that Naima couldn't understand, but the tone was clear relief mixed with recrimination. I know. Jun Young responded in Korean, then switched to English for Naima's benefit. I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong. I thought sending you away would keep you safe, but I was just being a coward. Afraid of losing you the way I lost Dad. Afraid of being weak. Mrs. Lee cupped his face with both hands, and Naima saw where Jun Young got his bone structure, his intensity. You are my son. My only child. Your safety, your happiness, these are all I want. But you sent me away like I was nothing. Like our family was nothing. You're everything. And I've been dying without you. Junyoung pulled her into a hug, and Naima watched this powerful, dangerous man cry in his mother's arms. Please come home. Please. I'll do better. I'll be better. Just please don't leave me alone anymore. Mrs. Lee pulled back, wiping tears from her son's face. Then her eyes found Naima, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Recognition dawned, followed by a smile. The kind girl from the diner. With a good heart, Mrs. Lee reached out, pulling Naima closer. You found him for me. You brought my son back. Actually, Naima said, I think he found me first. I just helped you find each other again. Mrs. Lee looked between them, at the way Junyoung's hand found Naima's automatically, at the way they stood close enough to touch. Understanding bloomed in her expression. This is why you came looking, she said to her son. This girl, she made you remember what matters. Yes. Junyoung's fingers laced through Naima's. Ioma, this is Naima. She's important to me. Very important. Mrs. Lee studied Naima with sharp eyes that missed nothing. You fed me when I was hungry, treated me with respect when I had nothing. You have a good heart, Naima Brooks. My son is lucky you saw past his foolishness. I'm still seeing past it, Naima said with a slight smile. It's a work in progress. Mrs. Lee laughed a sound like bells that made Junyoung's expression soften with longing. I like her. She doesn't let you intimidate her. Good. You need someone strong. Soon. I know. He pulled Naima against his side. I'm working on deserving her. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Mrs. Lee moved into Junyoung's penthouse, not into the guest room, but into the master suite's secondary bedroom. Traditional Korean family arrangement. She immediately began reorganizing his life, cooking proper meals, nagging him about health and sleep, and spending too much time working. Naima was there for all of it, pulled into the family dynamic with a warmth that both terrified and thrilled her. She'd quit 2 of her 3 jobs. Junyoung had been adamant, and for once, Naima had let someone take care of her. She kept working at the diner, but only 3 nights a week. The rest of her time was split between enrolling back in community college. Junyoung insisted on paying, and Naima was too tired to fight it, and learning to navigate the complicated world of being in love with a crime boss. Because that's what he was. No matter how much legitimate business he generated, Naima learned about the late-night phone calls, the meetings that happened in back rooms of restaurants, the way men deferred to him with fear disguised as respect. She learned about the violence that underpinned his empire, even as she saw the community programs he funded, the small businesses he protected, the way Koreatown thrived under his unofficial protection. It's complicated, he told her one night, lying in her arms in her tiny apartment that he'd offered 1,000 times to replace with something bigger, safer. I'm not a good man, Naima. I've done things, terrible things. To protect what's mine, to build this empire. I know. She traced the tiger tattoo, feeling the tension in his muscles. But you're also the man who sends his mother money anonymously when she donates it to charity. Who funds after-school programs for immigrant kids? Who protected me without asking for anything in return? That doesn't erase the blood. No. But it doesn't erase the good either. You're both Junyoung, dangerous and kind, ruthless and generous. And I'm choosing to love all of it, even the parts that scare me. He rolled over, pinning her beneath him with careful intensity. You scare me too. You make me want things I can't have. Safety, normalcy, a future that doesn't end in violence. Who says we can't have that? My life says. My choices. The enemies I've made. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. But God, I want to try. For you, for us. I want to build something that lasts. Then build it. Naima pulled him closer. One day at a time. One choice at a time. We'll figure it out together. But the universe had other plans. 2 months into their relationship, everything came crashing down. Naima was leaving campus after an evening class when she noticed the black SUV following her. Not Junyoung's security, she knew their vehicles by now. This was different, unfamiliar. She called him immediately. There's a car following me. Black SUV, tinted windows, not yours. Get somewhere public. Now. I'm sending people. The SUV swerved in front of her, and three men jumped out. Naima ran, but heels and exhaustion from a full day slowed her down. They grabbed her, and the last thing she saw before a cloth covered her mouth was Jun Young's name on her phone screen, still connected to the call. She woke in a warehouse, tied to a chair. Her head pounded, and her mouth tasted like chemicals. Across from her sat a man in an expensive suit, European features, cold eyes. Awake. Good. His accent was thick Russian, maybe. I am Viktor Kozlov. You are the girlfriend of Lee Jun-young, and you are now my leverage. Raid him and Lee Jun-young. He'll kill you for this, Naima said, proud that her voice didn't shake. Perhaps, but first he'll give me what I want. Territory. Access to his distribution networks. A seat at the table he's been denying me. Victor smiled without warmth. All for the life of one poor black waitress. Good trade, yes? You don't know him if you think he'll negotiate. I know he loves you. Love makes men weak. Desperate. I'm counting on both. They left her there for hours. Naima's mind raced, trying to find a way out, but her body was still sluggish from whatever they dosed her with. She thought about Jun-young, about Mrs. Lee, about the life she'd been building, about how unfair it was to finally find happiness, only to have it ripped away. The warehouse door exploded inward. Gunfire erupted sharp cracks that Naima felt more than heard through her chemically fogged brain. Men shouting in Korean and Russian. And then, Jun-young was there, cutting through her restraints with a knife that looked like it had already seen use that day. Are you hurt? His hands ran over her, checking for injuries. His shirt was spattered with blood, not his, she realized with dizzy relief. Drugged. But okay. Jun-young, I know. My men are handling it. He lifted her easily, carrying her toward the door. Behind them, the sounds of violence continued, thuds and gunshots and screaming. Viktor Kozlov, Naima managed. He wanted territory. Access. He won't be wanting anything anymore. Jun-young's voice was flat, emotionless, the voice of a man who just killed without hesitation or remorse. Outside, a familiar car waited. Dae-sung at the wheel, Mrs. Lee in the back seat. The older woman pulled Naima into the car, into her arms, murmuring Korean prayers and blessings while Jun-young slid in beside them. Hospital, he ordered Dae-sung, then to Naima. I should have protected you better. Should have seen this coming. No, dies. A brumming Newman seen the work. Stop. Naima cupped his face with shaking hands. You saved me. You found me. I almost lost you. His control cracked, and Naima saw the terror beneath. When I heard your call cut off, when I realized they had you, Naima, I would have burned this entire city down to get you back. I know, but you didn't have to. I'm here. I'm okay. Mrs. Lee spoke in rapid Korean, and Jun-young responded in the same language. Then he turned to Naima. She says we need to leave. Go somewhere safe until things settle. She's right. Leave? My job? My classes? Can wait. Your life can't. He pulled her close. Please, Naima, just for a few weeks. Let me keep you safe while I clean up this mess. She wanted to argue. Wanted to insist on independence and normalcy. But the fear in his eyes and the lingering terror in her own heart won out. Okay, but Jun-young, after we come back, we need to talk about your business, about what kind of life we can actually have together. I know, and I promise, we will. But first, let me make sure you're safe. That's all that matters right now. They went to Jeju Island, to a house that had belonged to Jun-young's father, a traditional home overlooking the ocean, far from the violence and politics of Los Angeles. For 3 weeks, they existed in a bubble. Naima recovered from the drugs and the trauma. Mrs. Lee cooked elaborate meals and told stories about Jun-young as a boy. And Jun-young orchestrated his response to the kidnapping from afar, through phone calls and video conferences. What happened to Victor? Naima asked one evening, watching the sun set over the water. He's dead. His organization is scattered, and I've made it very clear what happens to anyone who threatens what's mine. Jun-young's arm tightened around her waist. They won't make this mistake again. How many people died? Does it matter? Yes, it matters. Because I need to understand what loving you means. What it costs. Jun Young was quiet for a long time. Then, 15 of theirs, 2 of mine, and I'd do it again without hesitation if it meant keeping you safe. That's what scares me. Not the violence itself, but how easily you accept it. How normal it is for you. It's the world I live in. But does it have to be? You've built legitimate businesses. You have money or power. Without the crime, why not walk away? Because walking away shows weakness. And weakness in my world gets you killed. Gets everyone you love killed. Or, Naima turned to face him. It shows strength. Shows you're secure enough to choose a different path. Jun Young, I love you, but I can't live my life waiting for the next kidnapping, the next war, the next crisis. I need to know there's an endgame, a way out, and if there isn't, if this is who I am, and well, then I need to decide if I can live with that. And you need to decide if you can live without me. The ultimatum hung between them, heavy and unavoidable. Mrs. Lee had been quietly listening from the kitchen, and she spoke now in Korean, gentle but firm. Jun Young responded, and the conversation went back and forth for several minutes before he turned back to Naima. She says my father spent his whole life building honest businesses, and I dishonored his memory by turning to crime. She says love is more valuable than power, and only a fool would choose the latter. He smiled sadly. She's very blunt when she wants to be. She's also right, Naima said softly. I know. I've known for a while. But Naima, transitioning out, it's dangerous. It takes time. I'll have to broker deals, secure territories, make sure I'm not leaving power vacuums that lead to war. How long? 2 years, maybe 3. And it won't be clean. There will be violence, threats, negotiations, but at the end, he cupped her face. At the end, we could have something normal, safe, a life where you don't have to be afraid. Promise me you'll try, really try, not just say you will to keep me, I promise. On my father's grave, on my mother's life, on everything I am, I promise I will find a way out. For us. Naima kissed him, pouring all her fear and hope and desperate love into the contact. When they broke apart, Mrs. Lee was wiping tears, murmuring blessings in Korean. They returned to Los Angeles 3 weeks later. Jun Young immediately began the delicate work of transitioning his empire toward legitimacy. He promoted trusted lieutenants to handle the shadier operations while he focused on building legitimate businesses. He negotiated with rivals, establishing territories and rules that would prevent future conflicts. And slowly, painstakingly, he began extracting himself from the criminal world that had defined his adult life. It wasn't easy. There were challenges, rivals who saw his transition as weakness, old enemies who tried to capitalize on the chaos, internal conflicts as his own people questioned the changes. But Jun Young was as ruthless in pursuit of legitimacy as he'd been in pursuit of power. And gradually, it worked. Naima finished her degree, graduated with honors, and started working for one of Jun Young's legitimate businesses. A restaurant group that employed dozens and served as a legitimate front for what had once been money laundering. She refused any nepotism, working her way up from assistant manager to operations director through sheer competence. Mrs. Lee became the heart of their unconventional family, cooking elaborate meals, nagging them both about marriage and grandchildren, volunteering at Korean community centers. She and Naima developed a close bond, 2 women who understood what it meant to love difficult men, to see past their hardness to the vulnerability underneath. And slowly, impossibly, they built something that looked like a normal life. Date nights at restaurants, Sunday dinners with Mrs. Lee, plans for the future that didn't involve violence or crisis. 2 years and 4 months after the kidnapping, Jun Young called a meeting of all the major players in LA's Korean underground. In a private room at one of his restaurants, he stood before the men who'd once feared and respected him, and he made an announcement. I'm out. Effective immediately. My legitimate businesses will continue operating. My territories will be divided among you according to the agreements we've negotiated. My protection contracts will be transferred, and I will no longer participate in any criminal operations. The room erupted in questions and protests. Young waited for silence, then continued. This isn't weakness. It's choice. I've built something legitimate, something sustainable, and I'm choosing a different future. Anyone who has a problem with that can address it now. No one did. The tiger tattoo on his neck and the reputation he'd built were enough to ensure compliance, even in stepping away. When the meeting ended, Young walked out of that room and into a future he'd never thought possible. He found Naima waiting in the restaurant's main dining room, nursing a cup of coffee and working on her laptop. She looked up when he approached, reading his expression immediately. It's done. It's done. I'm officially retired from a life of crime. He slid into the booth beside her. Free to live boringly ever after. Boringly sounds perfect. She closed her laptop, turning to face him fully. So what now? Now? Young said, pulling a small box from his pocket. I ask you something I should have asked months ago. Naima's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a ring, elegant, simple, with a diamond that caught the light. Naima Brooks. You fed my mother when she was hungry. You saw past my reputation to the man underneath. You gave me a reason to be better, to choose differently, to believe in futures I thought were impossible. He took her hand. Marry me. Build this boring, normal, beautiful life with me. Let me spend the rest of my days trying to deserve you. Tears streamed down Naima's face. You already deserve me, you idiot. And yes, I'll marry you. He slid the ring onto her finger, and they kissed while the restaurant staff, who'd been suspiciously loitering nearby, erupted in applause. Mrs. Lee appeared from the kitchen, crying and laughing, and immediately launching into wedding planning in rapid Korean. Your mother's going to drive us crazy with wedding preparations, Naima murmured against Young's lips. I know. It's going to be perfect. The wedding happened 6 months later, in the garden of a restaurant. They now co-owned one of Young's legitimate ventures that Naima had transformed into one of the most successful Korean fusion restaurants in LA. The guest list was a wild mix. Naima's family from South Central, Mrs. Lee's friends from the Korean community, Young's business associates, both legitimate and formerly criminal, Naima's former co-workers from Frank's Diner. Frank himself walked Naima down the aisle. Her father had died when she was young, and the gruff diner owner had become a surrogate. You did good, girl? He whispered as he handed her over to Young. Real good. Also, the ceremony was bilingual, Korean and English, honoring both their worlds. And when they said their vows, Naima thought about that early morning at the diner, about a hungry old woman she'd bought dinner for, about how a single act of kindness had changed everything. I promise to see you, Naima said, tears streaming down her face. Not the boss, not the legacy, not the reputation. Just you. The man who eats bad kimchi fried rice at 6 a.m., who loves his mother fiercely, who chose to be better. I see you, Young. And I choose you. Every day. For the rest of my life. I promise to be worthy of you, Young said, his own eyes bright with emotion. To build a life where you never have to be afraid. To honor your kindness by being kind. To love you the way you love my mother completely, without expectation, just because it's right. He smiled through tears. You saved us both that day in the diner. You saved me from becoming something my father would be ashamed of, and I will spend every remaining day showing you what that gift means. They kissed as husband and wife while their impossibly mixed community cheered, and Mrs. Lee, standing in the front row, smiled through her tears and whispered a prayer of thanksgiving for the kind young woman who'd bought her dinner when she had nothing, and in doing so, had brought her son back to life. 5 years later, Naima stood in the kitchen of their home, a real house with a yard, in a neighborhood where their children could play safely, watching Young teach their 3-year-old daughter how to make kimchi. Mrs. Lee supervised, offering corrections in rapid Korean, while their daughter giggled and made a mess. Their son, barely a year old, slept in a carrier on Naima's chest. She'd taken 6 months maternity leave from her job as COO of their restaurant group, and Young had cut his hours to part-time to be more present with their children. It was normal, boring, perfect. What are you thinking about? Young asked, catching her staring. About how none of this should have worked. We were all wrong for each other on paper. Good thing we didn't stay on paper. He crossed to her, careful of the sleeping baby. and kissed her softly. Best decision I ever made was eating bad food at your diner. Best decision I ever made was buying dinner for a hungry woman. Mrs. Lee looked up from the kimchi, understanding enough English to catch the reference. She smiled, reaching out to squeeze Naima's hand. Kindness, she said carefully in English. Kindness changes everything. Yes, Naima agreed, looking at the life they'd built, complicated and beautiful and absolutely real. It really does. Their daughter held up a handful of kimchi, proud and messy. Look, Mama, I made it. You did, baby. You absolutely did. And watching her family laugh together in their kitchen, Naima understood something fundamental. Love wasn't about perfect timing or matching backgrounds or staying in your lane. Love was about seeing someone's hunger, literal or metaphorical, and choosing to feed it. About taking care of each other when the world said you shouldn't. About building bridges across impossible distances. She'd bought an elderly woman dinner at 3 a.m. because it was the right thing to do. And in return, the universe had given her this. A man who'd learned to be better. A mother-in-law who'd become her greatest ally. Children who would grow up knowing both their worlds. And a future built on nothing but kindness and choice. It was more than enough. It was everything. Epilogue. Frank's Diner closed down 2 years later, unable to compete with gentrification and rising rents. But Jun Young and Naima bought the building, renovated it, and reopened it as a community space, free meals for those who couldn't afford them, job training programs, a place where kindness was the only currency that mattered. On the wall, they hung a plaque. In memory of the moment a waitress bought dinner for a stranger and changed 3 lives forever. Mrs. Lee spent her final years volunteering there, serving food to people who reminded her of herself lost, hungry, invisible. And she made sure every single person who walked through those doors was seen, valued, treated with the dignity she'd been shown on her darkest night. When she died at 83, surrounded by her son, daughter-in-law, and 4 grandchildren, her last words were in English, careful, deliberate, meant for Naima alone. Thank you. For feeding me, for saving my son, for teaching us all what love really means. Thank you for raising a man worth saving, Naima whispered back. They buried her in a plot beside Jun Young's father, and at the funeral, Jun Young told the story of how a poor black waitress had bought his mother dinner, not knowing she was starting a